Believe it or not, AI is turning the internet into a sea of slop, and journalists are helping it happen. I'm Omar Oakes.
And I'm Hamish Nicklin.
And this is Believe It or Not, a podcast where two people who spent their careers inside media and advertising are now on opposite sides of the AI debate and are trying to find out whether the biggest claims actually hold up. So this week, Hamish, because we're talking about journalism, and last time I checked, I had slightly more journalism experience than you, I thought we'd do something a little bit different today. Normally, Hamish, you make the case and I interrogate it. This time, I think it's important that I make the case, and Hamish, you're going to try and talk me down from the ledge.
I love the fact that we're turning it around and that you're making the case for it this time. That's cool.
Yeah.
You know, I'm looking forward to this chat.
Yeah, well, even before, we get into the heart of it, I was looking around for kind of something weird and wonderful in the world of AI recently, and this is actually a perfect tee up for what we're going to speak about. So, have you seen this? This happened in March. Esquire Singapore published what it called an interview with an actor, a Japanese-American actor called Makenyu Maeda. He stars in the Netflix show One Piece. He'd actually, this actor had ignored the publication's emails requesting an interview. So instead of spiking the piece, they just fed a load of old quotes that he did into Claude and Copilot and published the output as an interview.
Really?
Yeah. And they even like put on like bracketed, kind of like in square brackets, like laughs added by a human editor. Now they did disclose it. Okay, there was a disclaimer at the top, but obviously people saw it and lost their mind.
Do you know what the disclaimer was? How clear was it? Did they explain what they'd done, like as in what you've just said? Yeah.
They essentially they were very upfront about what they did. But
do you know what? I feel okay with that. I think as long as you're upfront and transparent about how you're using AI and what's AI generated and what's real, I'm sort of okay with it.
There's one detail which was particularly bad. I mean, the AI generated an answer about the actor's relationship with his late father, who died in 2021. They actually subsequently deleted that part. But it's like, it's probably just not even just using the AI to make judgments about what quotes they're using, but even judgments about, should we actually dredge up this kind of like potentially harrowing thing about somebody's dead dad? I mean, it's not right, is it?
None of that's cool. I mean, look, I'm sort of okay with them making the caveat or the explainer that this was, generated by AI. But the fact they even had to do it or they thought to do it, it's like, oh, come on, that's poor editorial judgment.
Yeah. What have you seen, Hamish?
All right. Well, listen, same sort of vein of journalism, sort of. So look, I don't know if you know this, but my wife, she's a journalist. She's a drinks writer, focuses on wine predominantly. And last year we were chatting about this podcast, right? And I was talking about this segment, and she said, you know what? Why don't you talk about this? Which is that last year she got sent a bottle of something called CTZN. Note, there are no vowels in that. It's one of those cool, funky brands, CTZN. And it was about a year ago. It's made by an Australian winemaker, right? And the AI designed the whole thing. And the way it did it was it analysed consumer preferences, it analysed sales data, climate, soil chemistry, and then it suggested the perfect grape blends, the sort of percentages of the blend mixes they should have, the flavour profile, the sugar levels, dosage, the alcohol, all of that sort of stuff. And then they gave that sort of plan to skilled human winemakers who brought it to life. Winemakers are using AI to analyse consumers, figure out what they like, and then make the perfect bottle of wine. But here's the thing, man. Reviewers reviewed it. First of all, there was some, I don't know who the journalist was, gave it 3 out of 5, right, which doesn't seem bad. Easygoing, approachable, and straightforward, they said. Helena's verdict was it's inoffensive, which if you know my wife, you'll know that is a euphemism for meh. She's her view is, look, wine should never be meh. You might as well drink water. You know, it's just same old shit. It's like fine, it's competent, it's the median, the statistical average of what data says people want poured into a bottle. Those were her exact words. Now, look, I know that's going to feed straight into your argument for this episode, my friend. But in fairness, that was over a year ago, and that was before the models got properly good. So, you know, maybe the AA wine of 2026 vintage will be different. But, you know, food for thought, or wine for thought, I think.
I mean, that's fascinating. I'm always interested in the whole wine conversation. I love following actually on YouTube, but you know, wine YouTubers who review supermarket wine and versus
Helena
good
Sips.
wine.
YouTube, go find her, Helena Sips. Come on, I'm going to use this podcast to promote her too.
Yeah, forgive me, I've not seen her, but I'm sure she's fantastic. But it's interesting when professional sommeliers when they're talking about why supermarket wine, big brand wine is generally bad, they talk about how much sugar is in it. And I've read many times in the past that there was a big study actually, I think 20 years ago, where they compared like all the best wines in the world with kind of like really kind of cheap plonk, and consumers actually, you know, there was like thousands of people involved in the study, and consumers reliably will pick the slop, the plonk. And I think it's partly because of just the amount of sugar content that is just in cheap wine.
That's exactly it. I know this is an AI podcast, not a wine podcast, but Helena calls that the Pepsi challenge. You get cheap plonk that's got loads of sugar in it from very hot places where the grapes get really ripe and they don't turn to alcohol, so they stay there as sugar in the wine. And consumers love it because we've been evolved to love sweet things. Right?
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, actually the stuff that's got a bit more depth, a bit more interesting, has less sugar. Anyway, that is for a wine podcast that maybe you and I can do a spin-off with my wife.
Oh yeah, get some Lambrini just to really kind of drive the point home.
Right.
Anyway, so why are we here again? Oh yeah, I'm going to talk about why journalism has gone terrible because of AI. Now, I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is I want to talk about... I'm going to make this personal first. I'm going to do that because I think it's really important for this version of the conversation to go from... We usually go from macro to micro so far. I want to go from micro to macro. So talk about my own experience as a journalist, because I think it should be interesting, because I'm not a reporter working at a big organization where I'm kind of like being fed processes and editors are kind of mediating a lot of what I'm doing. I am doing everything from scratch now. I'm all the way through to publishing and promoting what I'm doing. All the way back, you iterate back, I'm doing the ideation. So, and believe me, I have tried to use AI in all parts of that workflow. So let me talk about that, and then we'll extrapolate into the business of journalism in terms of how AI is either helping or hindering it. So I went freelance at the beginning of 2025, and believe me, because I'm trying to build a business as well as doing lots of freelance journalism, I've tried to get AI to write in my style, not as an experiment, not just out of curiosity, but curiosity has played a part in it. But I also was genuinely asking myself whether, frankly, it was rational not to. You know, you are not, believe it or not, Hamish, the first person to come along and say that AI is going to kind of change everything about business, particularly if you're running a small business. And if you don't do this and you don't do that, you're going to get left behind. So, you know, I was very sensitive about that when I started last year. And we'll get on to opinion pieces, which are particular form of journalism. But remember, as part of my whole plethora of stuff that I do, I write data-led reports. I ghostwrite for business leaders. I write awards entries. This is real commercial work that pays money, puts food on the table. And frankly, I would be stupid, I would be ignorant if I just went into this thinking, well, a lot of my clients are probably sitting there thinking I can use AI for all of this anyway. So if I'm not at least trying to kind of get inside their heads and trying to do this for myself, then how can I go back to a client and say, oh, you shouldn't do that. You should use me instead. I need to at least know what the difference is.
That's a really good shout. That's a really good observation. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's been difficult. So, you know, I've tried to push the boundaries. I tried to get inside the machine, first using ChatGPT and now increasingly using Claude. And I gather most people listening to this, most people out there in the world are still using ChatGPT. Now, it didn't work in a lot of ways, at least not in the way I needed to. So believe me, I've done things like get the AI to interview me and ask 100 questions about what I think about the world and what's my writing style and why do I choose this form of kind of vocabulary over another. And you do all this work and you put it in there, and then you're like, okay, so let's build something together. Let's write an opinion piece, and it just never comes out right. There's always something AI about it. And even, not to get too technical, but even I've tried to kind of mitigate what is called context rot. Do you want to explain what context rot? This is where basically you give the AI kind of too much work to do within like a single chat, and it kind of gets overloaded. And the annoying thing about all of these tools is you kind of need to play this game where you kind of you give it this kind of like Goldilocks amount of information, like not too little, but also not too much, Well,
that was very true. It's less true now that the token window of these things has gone to 1 million tokens, and their ability to actually trawl through that 1 million tokens has got a lot better. So I'd say that was true 6 months ago. Less true today, man. But your point still holds. If you were doing this 6 months ago, and you were using ChatGPT or whatever it was a year ago, you said, you definitely would have suffered from context rot then. But listeners, less so now if you use the advanced models. Anyway, carry on, Omar.
Okay, yeah. If you throw money at the situation, I'm sure everything will be better. Anyway, so the style just doesn't work. And then even working backwards a step from that. So you think, okay, so I'm still going to write the thing myself, but maybe AI can be my thinking partner. Maybe it can help me structure arguments. That's where I think it gets more interesting. That's where I've had different levels of success, I would say. So, for instance, I think I mentioned this last week briefly, but I do a weekly Substack. Where I look at the big stories of the week, stuff that's coming out of the trade press, stuff that's coming from all the newsletters that I follow, and I try and kind of define what's the big story. And it usually involves pulling together 2 or 3 stories, as I did for this particular week, where, no surprise, I talked about journalism and AI.
You did.
Yeah.
It was a good one. It was a good one.
Thank you. And I think I've had more success with that because, again, coming back to what we've said numerous times before, AI, as I see it, is this wonderful tool at taking unstructured information and giving it a structure in a way that human beings are just not very good at, and even if they were good at, wouldn't have the time to do. It's great at doing that. So I have found some success where you're kind of looking at a load of newsletters, a load of trade media articles, and actually kind of like putting stuff into buckets. And I've got a system where I want to, I'm thinking about writing a book one day. I'm thinking about doing kind of longer term deep dives where I look at the last 6 months, for example. You need to have a filing cabinet to help you do that. And I think AI is very good at that. But even where I get uncomfortable is when it comes to actually structuring this piece and thinking, okay, I'm going to talk about, for instance, the Substack that I wrote this week was about how different publishers are tackling the AI plagiarism problem, stealing content. Big publishers like News Corp and Le Monde are kind of like doing deals, suing the ones that aren't doing deals with, whereas smaller publishers, obviously because they don't have that legal heft behind them, have to have alternative strategies. That was an interesting piece because I get to pull together different threads. But structuring that particular piece, when you ask the AI to say, okay, first I'm going to talk about this, and then I'm going to talk about that, and then I'm going to talk about that, that's where I think it gets really problematic as well. Because the point is that the writing, I often say that writing is thinking. I often don't really know what I think about a lot of things until I've actually written it down, either typing or handwriting. We spoke about that last week. But when you're actually kind of thinking through something and structuring it, that is thinking as well. The structuring is thinking. And I don't think that AI is very good at that either. When it comes to, where I mentioned before, other things I do in such of, if I got an AI to just write an awards entry or got it to write an in-depth report that involves a load of data, I think if you give it very targeted tasks, perhaps, but I haven't found that you can just give it a load of prompts and a load of data and a load of stimulus and it just spits out something that's good. Maybe I'm using it wrongly. What do you think? I know you don't do this sort of work, but what I'm describing and kind of where I'm hitting the boundaries of where I think this is actually useful, does that make sense to you, or do you think this basically comes down to user error?
So I think it makes a lot of sense, and I do a lot of this sort of thing myself. Obviously, I'm not a journalist. I don't get paid to create the content, but it's just my business partner and me running Agent Flow. And because he's the technologist, I have to do all the content marketing and the marketing side of promoting our business, which involves writing stuff on LinkedIn. I've even started creating YouTube videos and obviously preparing for these podcasts, right? All of that sort of stuff. So I have to do a lot of creative thinking and develop creative output myself. And I would like to come to what I use it for in a minute, Omar. But just going back to your point around, because I think you made some really interesting points there. And I just want to make sure I've totally understood it, right? So when you say the structural thinking or the structuring is the thinking, is that sort of like deciding what to lead with, how to frame something, what angle to take? Are you saying that is the journalism? It's not like just admin that you do before you pick up your pen or start typing. You're saying it is the journalism. And if you outsource that, if I'm just following your logic, if you outsource that to AI, even if the finished article reads and sounds like you, because maybe you've typed it based on the outline that the AI came up with, because the shape of the argument was chosen by a model that was trained on every article ever written on the internet, it's just going to gravitate back towards the median, like that wine I talked about, the Citizen wine I talked about at the beginning. It's gonna. Are you saying it's? I don't know. It'll find the most common framing, the median angle. Is that your point?
I think you've identified the cause of why it doesn't work. The hypothetical you just gave was, even if it created something that I look at it and think, oh yeah, that's brilliant, copy paste done. Even if that happened, yes, it would make me uncomfortable. Maybe there are journalists out there listening to think, well, I've done that. It's great. It's brilliant. I can just put my feet up and, play games all day or whatever, right?
To your point, you can't do that because your clients who are paying you to do stuff think you're doing that. They go, well, bollocks to it. I'll do it myself. Why do I need Omar to do it? So I get that you can't outsource that.
That's why I'm interested. So I'm interested to see, okay, why can't a client just they've got all the data, they've got the objectives, they just use AI for whatever writing task they need and done.
Yeah.
So number one, I don't think it can do it. And number two, again, I come back to the point, is that actually doing the work of crafting this is the thinking. And even if the AI could do it for you, I maintain that it can't, but even if it could, you are robbing yourself of that ability to think for yourself, to think through something. Because we don't live in a vacuum. It's not like we just kind of, okay, I need this marketing thing to do, and once I do it, I'm done and I can focus on more important things. I do happen to believe, because I do this for myself as a business now, because I don't want to bore you, but I've just been spending the last 2 weeks over the last 2 weeks kind of rebuilding my website, and I've got some new products I want to talk about. I can't just get an AI to just write all this marketing copy for me, because the products don't live in a vacuum. They're part of kind of what I'm about as a journalist and a consultant. They're about kind of what I'm offering to the world in terms of this is who I am and this is what I believe. Those don't live in isolation. I don't just put these things out there and I just forget about them. In the same way that if I'm again, coming back to writing awards, like, you don't just enter some industry awards and this thing we did was brilliant and I don't even need to think about it again. It lives within the continuum of this is our business and this is what we believe in, at least if it's a good awards entry, right?
Right.
And this is where, unfortunately, a lot of people out there probably don't even think that deeply about it. But I can tell you that it makes a hell of a lot of difference when a judge is reading your awards for 2 minutes and considering yours versus someone else's. You need to have an awards entry that's rooted in a whole lot more than, yeah, this product was great, it's brilliant.
So I'm hearing a couple of things here, Omar. One is, if a client hires you, which they should do, what they're going to get is they're going to get you, not an AI. And they're going to get you and your thoughtfulness and your structure, which is brilliant. Okay, so I love to hear that, because I think that's really important for people to know that they're going to get you, not something that they could do themselves. But I want to go back to what you were saying about this concept of a journalist almost sitting on their own with full autonomy of the way the piece is structured. Because, as I said, my wife is a journalist, right? She is actually the most read wine writer in the country because of who she writes for, all the publications. So she's not insignificant in the wine industry. And I've heard her talk to her editors on the phone about articles that she's written, where the editor knows nothing about wine, but Helena is the expert, okay? And here's how it feels to me it actually works. So she'll pitch an idea to an editor, or they'll pick up the phone to her and ask her to cover a topic. She then pitches how the story might actually work and how it unfolds, as in the structure. And the editor almost always pushes back, right? Suggests a different angle, says lead with this, not that. They agree that. Then she goes off and writes it. It goes back. The editor then says, I want you to move this around. I want you to add this. I want you to change it. Sometimes the editor weighs in at the last minute and just changes stuff once she's submitted it that she hasn't even seen until, she opens up the paper and there it is. Now, that thing that hits the paper, is that her work? Is that journalism? I'd say, of course it is. It's her name's on the byline. It's her expertise. But to your point around the structural thinking and the structural choices, in the way that you talked before there about not wanting to outsource that because that is the thinking. Well, in this process, I suppose arguably her structure was shaped not by her on her own, but in a collaborative process with her editor, with somebody else that wasn't her who was doing the thinking. She didn't make them alone. She never does, right? Even though she is one of the foremost experts on wine in the country, editors who know nothing about it ask her to change what she writes and how she structures it. Not about the journalism, not about the wine, thank God. No one ever changes that detail, but the structure for it. And I don't think any journalist ever does, do they?
Yeah, so what you're describing is exactly the reason why humans working together in a team invariably will produce, if they're experienced and collaborative humans with good judgment, they will produce something that's a lot better than one person doing them by themselves. So yes. when I was an editor, or when I was a section editor, or when I was a reporter, you should be very kind of cognizant of the fact that you are working as a team of people. Particularly when I was a news editor, and there are some things I was good at and other things I wasn't good at, and sometimes just having a brilliant editor, and lots of different editors. Some are nice, some are very stern. I work with all sorts, but the best ones have invariably been the ones who are great teachers, whether they mean to be or not, but they just make you better, right? Okay. Because they understand what better looks like and why it's important. And this is something that the AI can't give you. The ideal with publishing or broadening out to broadcasting, and we actually kind of we talked about in the last episode about the company you keep, where we talk about broadcast media, because readers, viewers, users, they understand that there is a team of professionals behind serving you this content, that because of the judgment they have, because of the refined experience, the particular specialist expertise that they have, that content is going to be really, really good, because there's people coming together, not just working alone, but coming together to actually have those conversations about, have you considered this? And, do you know what? This other person over there, that person can help you. He or she is really good. And AI is not giving you that, because, to your point, when you rightly identified the cause of why it's not very good, because it gives you this generalized model. All
right. So listen, I concede entirely that humans collaborating create better things, and that we're all okay with that. So then there's no doubt about that. I agree with this. So I suppose your problem is not that you need to have a lone journalist working fully autonomously to create the structure the way they want to. You're okay with collaboration. I suppose you're saying your problem is that the collaboration happens with a non-human, as in an AI, because the AI then, because it's trained on everything on the internet, just gives you the mean of the internet. All right. So, and again, I don't disagree with that, but that's a choice. right? And what I mean by that is, what if Helena's paper trained an LLM on their entire back catalogue, every single article, every editorial decision, every piece that's ever been through the editor's hands, right? Because you can do all of this. So it means that the model isn't going to hit some sort of internet mean, but that paper's mean. The structural suggestions it would make would be shaped by the same sort of institutionalized voice that her editor is already applying, whether the editor knows they're doing it or not, because the editor's been there a long time and they understand the style guides, they understand the structure, they understand how that paper wants things done. But the AI and the LLM could do that too. Would that output be any different from what happens now when she goes back and forth? Probably, but I think it would definitely not be some sort of internet mean, because I think we were talking about this while we were preparing for this. One of the things you were worried about was if every paper, a news organization or magazine did this, then every article would follow a similar sort of structure because they'd all be trained on the internet's mean. But in this case, it wouldn't be. It would still sound like that paper. It would be structured like that paper. It would be trained on that paper's style guide, that paper's approach, that paper's slant and take on things, right? And in this instance, the AI is just playing the role the editor plays, or am I overplaying that, Omar?
Well, okay, so let me concede something. So, and by the way, I was getting a bit sensitive before about whether this kind of like looked like an ad for what I'm doing. Like, I'm sorry, listeners, I did not want this to come across as an ad. I'm actually trying to be quite vulnerable here, because I don't want clients I've worked with or will work with in the future to think that I'm going off and using AI definitely without their permission and data breaches and all the rest of it. I definitely wouldn't want that. I don't do that. Wouldn't do that. But I think we need to just cut the BS with this. There are so many people who are listening to this and out there in the wider world who will be using AI anyway, whether they're disclosing it or not. And I'm sure, I've not had the discussion with them, but I'm sure that clients will be out there thinking, "Oh, is this person just using AI and putting their feet up?" Do you know? I would hope the quality of the work shows not. But anyway, I'm doing this because I'm trying to be as honest as possible about this, because this is my big thing. I've written about it publicly. Publishers need to be transparent about how they're using AI and why.
That I don't disagree with.
Yeah. So let's take an example where I concede the point. You mentioned about different publications and kind of their style and everything. Let's take something which is happening already to an extent. Sports reports, court reporting, financial reporting, AI scanning earnings reports and kind of getting what you need to know out of it. Hansard, parliamentary reports in the UK. Those are just transcripts which are spit out. Now, to your point, could you, if you're like a right of centre paper, a left of centre paper, let's say the Telegraph and the Guardian, could you take the same Hansard reports of what happened in Parliament during this particular debate and put out your own spin on it based on lots of kind of training data on your own publication, not the generalised internet? I'm sure that you could. You could.
I know you could. Absolutely, you could.
Yeah.
You didn't even need to train it on the data. You could create a skill in Claude that creates some form of background and context about your perspective and position. Give it some reference articles, and boom! I bet you it could do a pretty good job.
Yeah. If an editor is actually evaluating that content and checking that it's accurate,
correct.
I can see a place for that.
Why is that okay? Just out of interest.
Because it's very clear where the source data came from.
Okay.
It's very clear that it came from a transcript from, an official body, Hansard's, the same thing with an earnings report, the same thing with a sports report. There's no disputing where the raw data comes from.
Yeah.
And how you're using that data, again, as long as it's accurate,
yep.
I can understand the rationale of that. Let's take it a stage further. Let's be honest about what has happened to the state of journalism in the last 20 to 30 years with the advent of the internet. Copy, paste, print. Get a press release, turn it around as quickly as possible. Don't do any checking. Don't get any original sourcing. Don't even, spend the time to ring up the company and ask a further question just to get an alternative slant for your publication. Copy, paste, publish. I don't know if you've come across the book Flat Earth News by Nick Davies, the famous journalist. That came out like 20 years ago. I want to say more than maybe 15 years ago, but it was a long time ago, where he warned, he likened it to drug dealing. He was essentially saying that a lot of publications have essentially become the equivalent of drug dealers because it's putting out information to the world without checking it. The same as I don't know that much about drug dealing, but similar sort of process. But you know, he uses that kind of stark comparison because ubiquity of information doesn't mean that things get better, because you could put out misinformation as well. And journalists, alongside academics, journalists are that, you know, the cliche about the first draft of history. The reason why we had this whole conversation about why you need to have humans, experienced and knowledgeable humans in the loop, is because they can actually discern what information is worth the reader knowing, what is the quality of that information, and not just putting it out to a machine. And unfortunately, journalism has got itself into a state where there's a lot of copy and pasting going on, a lot of judgment is not being exercised, and it's made itself vulnerable to just using AI.
So what you're saying is pre-AI, poor practices were happening anyway.
Absolutely.
But with AI, maybe what you could do is take that press release, and rather than just copy and paste the press release, which you're saying is already happening, and certainly in local news, and when we talk second order impacts, I want to come back to local news. But in local news, when I pick up my local paper, and actually I spoke to one of the senior journalists on our local paper here, they say this, they admit this happens, taking the press release and basically just posting it. But surely with AI, at least you can put a veneer of journalism on top of it by taking that press release and turning it into something a bit more interesting. Couldn't you? So whilst it's happening anywhere, it's more enjoyable a read. Does that make it better? And if that's happening more and more, surely that gives the editors more time to be discerning, to choose what press releases to put, to choose whether or not a press release is real. Would it not happen?
I wouldn't dare tell any editor or any proprietor, I wouldn't dare tell them how to run their publication. But it seemed to me as an editor, yeah, okay, news is news sometimes, particularly in trade journalism. You know, person gets job, company wins account.
So reporting, basically.
Reporting
of things that have happened objectively real.
But what I would always do when I was an editor anyway, it was just my philosophy, that actually try and contextualize for the reader, why does this actually matter that person got this job? You know, why did they get the job? What's the state of the company? What does the state of the job actually say about what's happening with this particular business? I think at its worst, journalism tends to kind of devolve into everything becomes about sports. We kind of imagine that it's all kind of like transfer news and, you know, people. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like trivializes the whole business of kind of why we're putting things out into the world. And we actually need to work a bit harder as journalists to actually contextualize and explain what's going on. But that takes time, and no one has time. No one wants to create time, and everyone wants to run on super thin margins. And I just see that this increasing use of AI is just going to accelerate that. And it is going to become slop, and there is going to be kind of less explaining and contextualizing. Because the AI can't do that, I really worry we're going to get ourselves into a situation where journalists themselves aren't able to discern the difference. I mean, okay,
I'm not sure you're right to say that AI can't do that, actually. I think you're... I just want to push back and say, I get your point. I absolutely understand your point, that rather than just taking a piece of news that's happened and saying, you know, man or woman got job, move on. You want to say man or woman got job, and this is why that's interesting, or this is the state of the company that they've joined and the challenges they might face, right? I get that. But the reality is, I don't think it's beyond the wit of the really powerful AI tools that we've got today, the 4.6s, the 5.3 ChatGPTs, the 3.1 Pros of Gemini, to find that bit of context and add it in. I really don't. It's getting very, very good, especially if you give it a skill or some sort of clever prompt, which is not rocket science. it will get into the habit of looking for that sort of context. Now, it might get it horribly wrong, just like a junior journalist might, but that's where the editor comes back. So I suppose I'm not disagreeing with you that there's a risk that you just get same old slop, because I think that is. But I do think that the way that you can combat that is how you use some of these more advanced models. And so I suppose this where we've got to now is not a fundamental disagreement of the risk, because I do think you're right, there is a risk. But I think from my perspective, it comes down to how capable people are at using the tools.
Yeah, I think that you give the AI too much credit for being able to, because again, what is the AI good at? Taking unstructured information and putting it into a structure that, we can understand. And the thing was, even as this kind of very particular example of a story about person X getting a job, if with all the time in the world, if a journalist has an assignment to write up that story, I would want them to kind of go to their contacts, ask about the person, find out about what's been going on at the company, talk to the person, talk to the comms person at the company, get a rounded view about what's going on. I mean, this is unrealistic. This is just an example. But you can't. But we're talking about the journalist to collect giving them a very specialized task of information gathering and contextualizing that you just can't get from a large language model.
No, you're right. You definitely won't get that stuff. My view on this is pre-AI, that was never happening. There was one job I got where the article announced my role. I think it was the one where I got the Guardian job. The journalist then went round and asked a bunch of people what they thought of me. And they were quoted about it. Said, yeah, so what you said happened, right? That was it. None of the others ever happened. Not when I went to AOL, not when I went to Dentsu. It didn't. It was just reported. So I think, and the Dentsu job was arguably a bigger job, a bit more, I don't know. It didn't get commented on in the same way by the journalist. It was just reported on. So, this was happening. This wasn't happening pre-AI much anyway. But look,
that's my point. It's like, what is the problem AI is trying to solve here? Because as we both accept, it's not solving the problem that was happening anyway before AI, was journalists not having enough time and space to do the jobs that they should be doing.
Well, this is where I would go back and say the whole premise of the agent flow business that my partner and I set up is to let AI to automate an awful lot of the drudgery, the work, the system stuff, the human meet API, the stuff that an AI is very, very good at, so that your people have time to do the sorts of things that they're not able to do. So all the things that you've just said there about, a journalist doesn't have the time now to pick up the phone and go, what do you think of Hamish? Do you think this is the right job for him? Right? They've now got the time because some of the other stuff has been done by the AI. Now, to that point, I'd love to talk about how I use it. Like, as we've already stated, I'm not a journalist. I might have worked at The Guardian, but I was definitely not a journalist. And I have the same sort of problem that you do, just from the other direction, right? You're worried about outsourcing too much of your thinking, if I'm right. My problem is I have way too much thinking. My brain goes down rabbit holes and it gets sidetracked by systemic thinking and connected ideas, and I see implications and implications. I overthink stuff, which is one of the reasons why I burnt out 3 years ago, because my brain just doesn't stop. And it just goes through rabbit holes and all over the place, which is why when I talk sometimes I can get all rambly, which is why you edit this podcast so well. Anyway, it's useful to have a brain that does that sort of shit, because it often sees things that other people don't see, which is useful when you're trying to solve problems. But mate, it's awful when you've only got an hour and a half, 2 hours, and you're trying to make a 15-minute YouTube video, right? It really doesn't help. So pre-AI, when I was in that sort of situation of having to come up with something, I don't know, it was a pitch or some sort of creative document, I worked best in groups. All right, I needed people around me to say, yeah, that's a good bit, use that, or no, that's cool, park it, or no, that's just rubbish, or connect these things. But I couldn't do it solo, and I just can't, because the ideas are just flying around like mad, crazy dudes on speed. It's annoying, and I've never been able to do that.
Yeah, this is again, it's the AI using unstructured data, the crazy things flying around, and structuring it.
Right, so let me tell you how I use that, because I want to be really transparent about how I use it too, to help me with that stuff. But the point here, and what you'll hear, is this is the AI helping me do my thinking. The bit that you said can't be done by AI because we end up just with coming to the median if you let the thinking happen, right? So I just want to show you what I do and then say why I think it sort of counters the median thing. So because of all of that I've just said about the way my brain is a bit mad, I built a Claude skill to help me with this. Right, and the first step of the skill is I brain dump. I talk for 10 or 15 minutes, and I literally talk. I've got a Willow voice thing on my laptop, so I press the buttons and I just talk. It's raw, it's messy, it's contradictory, it's repetitive, it's all over the place. It allows me to go down my rabbit holes and all that stuff. Claude then does what you've just said Claude is very good at. And what I've asked it to do at that stage is say to me, Claude, what do you think I'm actually trying to say here? Right? And it says, what I think you're actually trying to say, if I distill it all, is this. And what's often interesting is it gets it wrong. And I often go, no, that's not it. And then it'll say, okay, what's wrong with it? What did I miss? And that back and forth is where the real thinking comes in. The real idea capitalizes. It's me collaborating with AI. It's not me outsourcing the structure. It makes sense of the initial 15 minutes of madness and gives it a structure, but it's then looking at that structure and having it played back to me that I notice what I would do differently. So it helps my thinking because it does the scaffolding that I'm incapable of doing on my own. It's not generating my ideas. It's what an amazing comms person. Like I used to work with, you must know her, Caroline Cook. I want to give a shout out to her.
Yeah.
She's a legend comms person, brilliant at this stuff. It's what she used to do with me all the time. It's what Helena's editors do. It's helping me find that sort of like the signal in the noise of my own brain, right? And then once we've sort of crafted what the idea is, the point I'm trying to make in the video, so the outcome of what we're trying to do, it then writes a prompt for me that I can take to Perplexity, which is one of my favorite sort of grounding search engine AI tools, to find out if it's original. Has anyone ever said this before? If they have, right, and it goes off and it searches the internet. It's like the prompt is very, it's different every time, but it takes my idea and it says, has this been said before in some shape or form? And then if people have been talking about this, because what I don't want is to create a video and everyone go, oh, mate, you're late to the party. That was what initially stimulated it. And it comes back and it tells me potentially what's distinctive or not distinctive about my take on something. And, if it is distinctive, then we carry on, right? So I try and use AI to help me avoid that median thinking, if that makes sense. Because we then, what we do is, if we found what the idea is, if we find the end destination, if we find that it's relatively original, at least in its current format and structure of my argument, then we look for the red thread, that narrative that holds everything together. So that I can actually say, okay, this is how I'll start telling the story through the lens of this. And again, we go through the same process. It comes up with an idea. We go back and forth. The fact that it makes mistakes and gets things wrong is helpful to my creative process because I then can build on that and it helps me nudge me into the right part of my brain to say, that's what I want. And then the skill gives me 4 options for a hook. Right, it specifically gives me 4 hooks, and they're always rubbish, man. They're always classic AI generated. They really are. They're the things you see on LinkedIn all the time as, those sort of punch you in the face hooks. But that just is the same. That's useful to me because they're rubbish. I can bounce off it and go, actually, what we might want to do is this. They stimulate ideas for me in their rubbishness, which I'm pretty sure is a classic idea generating method, is try and find the gold in the shit. Do you know what I mean? And at every stage of that process, I'm accountable, right? The ideas are mine. The brain dump is mine. The pushback is mine. The voice that comes out of it is mine. In that process, the AI, I would argue, is playing the role the editor plays, the role that the newsroom plays, the role that the amazing Caroline Cook would play if I could afford her to come and help me do this every week when I'm creating my scripts. But I'm accountable for it.
But that's the point, isn't it? I think you've hit on something that isn't the common thread between what we're doing. Is you just said it now. If I could afford just to have Caroline just kind of sit in my office with me all day, and she could just sit there doing nothing most of the day, but when I need her, I could just turn around and ask her for particular help with this task. Wouldn't you prefer to have that? Because I would prefer, instead of using an AI to kind of help me as a thinking partner as much as I do, I would much actually prefer to have a team of really clever expert writers, domain experts, just sitting there whenever I need them. Isn't the problem is that AI isn't actually giving us something that's super duper beyond what human beings are doing? They're just kind of like filling in the gaps for two people, frankly, who are, working in isolation and need quick specialist help with writing tasks. And this is the best that we're getting in lieu of actually having human beings helping us.
Yes, if I could, yes, then I would. I find that what this does is it's very, very good, but like she is one of the very best, right? So of course I'd always want to work with her. But if you can't afford the very, very best, which an awful lot of organizations can't, then this is for me a very good option for me to take. And the other thing is, I do this on my time. I do it when I'm ready. The AI, the skill sits in my Claude when I'm ready to do it. If that happens to be 11 o'clock at night, because I've had a long day looking after the kids, doing whatever happens, then I start doing it at 11 o'clock. And the skill just fires up and I go. The challenge of working with humans is humans don't want to work with me at 11 o'clock. And even if I was in an organization, that aside, I might want Caroline. And I'm sorry to keep talking about Caroline. I hope she doesn't mind. But I'm promoting her as someone who's a legend. I might actually want her focused on something else rather than helping me sort out my crazy ADHD brain, right? There might be more useful, more valuable tasks that she could be doing for the organization than helping me, basically coaching me on how to write a piece. So actually, I'm not saying we don't need the likes of Caroline. I'm saying that actually she might be better served and get more value for the organization doing other things than helping me make sense of my ramblings. So,
well, then we're talking about efficiency, are they? And that's kind of something management has to, efficiency of people.
Exactly.
And it's a different conversation. But my worry about this, where we were talking about token maxing on a different episode, in this ridiculous practice of people just using AI for the sake of using AI. I worry that a lot of people are, as maybe I've been doing in the past, is using AI for the sake of AI just out of curiosity, but also, there was a purpose to it. But maybe we're all just using AI too much because we don't have that efficiency concern that we do. We're actually working with human beings. We're almost out of time, actually, but let's just talk very briefly about the second order effects of this. I'm very keen to talk about what happens with local news because I started off, I spent the first 4 or 5 years of my career working in local news, and, there's a hell of a lot of copy pasting going on back then that we had to. We had virtually no reporters. We had to do this, right? But what do you think happens? I mean, you live all the way in the Isle of Wight. That's almost France, isn't it? I mean, God, I don't even know what's happening in the Isle of Wight. I mean, it never hits the national news that I can see. I mean, do you even have a local newspaper? Is AI already doing your news down there?
No, we do. We've got a couple. We've got the County Press, which is, been going since the 1880s. It's a well-established paper. We've got On the Wight, we've got the Island Echo, we've got the Observer, we've got a bunch, right? But they're doing the best they can. They're not daily anymore, they're weekly, and some of them are just online. So we have a range, right? But
do you think AI is going to save local papers, for example, or local websites?
Here's my thinking on this, right? I once picked up a copy of the County Press, which is the big one, and on the front page was something like 2 swans that had wandered out of the Medina River and caused traffic chaos. Classic Isle of Wight story. And the reason I love living here because it's not about stabbings and horrible shit going on where I used to live. But it was a brilliant story. But the reality is, you might listen to that and go, well, there's not much going on the Isle of Wight, so they talk about swans entering the road. But the rest of the paper is full of court reports and planning notices and press releases, like just you said, and the occasional swan and cow strolling into the street. But here's the thing: when the ferry breaks down, they report the ferry broke down. When a councillor calls our island roads unacceptable for all our potholes and the fact that they're all bloody closed because they've chosen to repair them all at the same time so you can't drive anywhere, they report that the councillor said it was unacceptable. That's reporting, not investigating. And I have a real thing, because when you go down to the pub and you talk to people, they're fuming. And there's people with their own perspectives on, who signed that contract with Island Roads? Where's the money going? The bus companies, the ferry operators, who's investigating what's actually going on and why this unacceptable, quote unquote, from the councillor is happening? I don't think anyone's got the resources to investigate that. And what I would love is for AI to come along and say, look, we've got our handful of reporters because we can't afford to have too many. Let AI do the reporting of the fact that the ferry broke down, because you can find it from the ferry's Twitter feed, right? Let the AI report which roads are closed on Island Roads as an information service, because you can get that from Ferry Island Roads website. Let the reporters go and ask the questions of why. Why is everything so shit? Like, what's causing it? What do we need to do differently? Let's hold these people to account, because at the moment it feels like people are getting away with all sorts of things they shouldn't be getting away with. Now that might be wrong. It might be all legit and above board, and I do not want to get sued for any accusation, but certainly that's what the pub chat is. That's what the people locally feel. And isn't that what a local paper used to do back in the day?
Exactly. You'd have journalists who would be in the pub having the same chat. Right? Exactly. You'd have a network of journalists with contacts who would do that, and they would get a feel for what people are saying and thinking, for knowing kind of what should be on page 1 versus page 7, right? Now, I don't disagree with that in principle, and I share your utopian dream. But the problem is, we've seen this story before with the advent of technology. When everything went from paper to digitization, it didn't mean that suddenly journalists were freed from the drudgery of reading letters and handwriting things. It meant that big organizations were able to do more with less. And there's always the temptation with corporate journalism that you're just going to kind of have one reporter covering huge swathes of the whole country, which is what happens now in some local newspaper organizations in the UK. It's not actually to do with technology. It's actually the fundamental business model has been broken for a long time, and journalists. And, again, I'm not saying what I'm doing is revolutionary, but actually having a model where you have commercial things that sit alongside your journalistic things, I think that going forward, that has to be, if we're going to have AI helping us with citizen journalism or more democratized journalism, that sort of model has to be how it works.
So what you're saying is this isn't an AI problem or a technology problem. This is a business model problem.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not an AI problem.
No.
But what I'm saying is that if you have the right leadership in these places who are prepared to keep with the investment, you can invest in the AI to do this stuff that creates better output, which then rebuilds the readership again, or maybe even gets people to pay for it behind a paywall, makes it all the more valuable, and you start having the flywheel going the other way for a change, other than the way it's been going for the last 20 years. Because ultimately, I would pick up the county press if it was definitely going to talk about some investigations that are done into certain things that have been pissing me off about living on the island, the ferries, the roads, the weird planning consents that have been given to things that don't feel right to me, right? I would pick that up and I would buy it. I would pay for that. But I don't necessarily want to pay for swans escaping the river, strolling around the road, or reports on what the roads are closed, because I can go to the website and see that myself. In fact, I could build an app, right, which scrapes the Island Roads website and sends me the alerts. I don't need the paper for that, right? I would pay for the journalism if it was more giving me what I wanted to understand, which is, well, why is my life being ruined by these, not ruined, I'm over dramatic here, but being so badly impacted by these things? What's going on that's happening? And what I'm saying is that's not an AI problem. It's potentially an AI solution to a business problem that takes leadership. And we're now moving into almost like a business strategy podcast rather than an AI podcast, because I think we're both agreeing AI is not the problem. But what I'm saying is I think it could be a solution if given to the right type of leadership.
Yeah, I just think I think the problem that AI could solve is the problem is actually bigger than that. Because again, your example about alerts. Well, okay, if it's very short term because I need to get away for the weekend and I'm worried about traffic, I need to know there's alerts. That's one thing. But if you're actually interested in news, why stuff is happening in the world, well, you actually, you need to kind of take that information and be able to see the patterns. Or frankly, you need someone who works at the highways agency or the local council who in the olden days would ring up the paper and like, you might want to check out this burst water main. It's because there was a big fight there and somebody had an axe and one thing led to another. This is a terrible example, but do you know what I mean? It's the stories come out of people. Stories come from people. They can't just come from just robots scanning information. You need humans to actually understand what the data is telling you. And while I completely accept AI takes that unstructured data and gives you a structure, it can't tell you why something is relevant or interesting to a human audience. But
I think I'm saying exactly the same thing as you. I think I'm saying exactly the same thing as you, is that the humans need to do the human bit and the AI needs to do the drudgery bit, the simple bit, so that the humans can add the human layer onto it, which they don't have time to do today. I'm pretty sure we're saying the same things.
Yeah, okay, all right. So let's accept that. But before we get to a verdict, now obviously you were Chief Revenue Officer at The Guardian, you know the publishing world very well. Let's talk about national media, as we kind of started off talking about. I am very clear that publishers need to be more transparent going forward about how they're using AI and why. I mean, was it when you were at The Guardian? I know it was a while ago, but this technology isn't completely revolutionary. Did you have anything in place? You're right on North London Guardian socialist massive. Surely you had some sort of disclaimers in place already.
Not about AI. Not that I can remember we had anything about AI, but we did spend time because of Carol Cadwallader's reporting for The Observer about, Meta's and
Cambridge Analytica,
and their use of data. We did have a very clear policy and code of conduct around data. And I remember there was a lot of discussion in the editorial team around the Exco, around where do we stand on data? How do we use data? Let's make sure that we can justify how we use it. And we spent time, I remember the data team, the editorial team, my commercial team, we got together to figure out how do we use data? What are we happy with? So that we could clearly articulate to our readers and our partners how we use data, right? In a way that we were comfortable with, that seemed fair. Now that actually meant for me as a commercial person, I had to turn off certain things that would make us money because it was the right thing to do. Classic Guardian, making it hard to be commercial, but it was the right thing to do for the readers. We didn't have one for AI. However, I noticed that they have now done one for AI because obviously they did a deal with OpenAI. I think it was OpenAI, in the way that I think you talked about Le Monde. I think they did one of those. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's what drove this. I can't comment on that deal because I've got nothing to do with it. But they have got what I discovered preparing for this, an editorial code of practice and guidance around generative AI. And it's very good, actually. It's very good. I think, in my opinion, it supports my case about how journalists can use AI more than yours. Because I'm going to read verbatim from it. Okay. Right? It says, AI tools can be used carefully and responsibly as part of the creation of journalism. But the material created or adapted using generative AI can raise significant issues around bias, ownership, plagiarism, and intellectual property rights. Most importantly for journalism, it's not reliable or consistent and tends to introduce errors and inaccuracies in unpredictable ways. All right. So far, this is everything that you're warning against in terms of, using it badly, giving fake news and all that stuff. It then says, Guardian audiences are entitled to expect that the work that appears under your byline has been authored by you. Journalists are always accountable for the journalism they create, and the use of the tools requires absolute rigor and responsibility. So again, more falling on your lines here about how they should be using it. Gen AI can be used to enhance our journalists' expertise, but not replace it. Oh, hello. Feels like it's coming back to my perspective on things. Active human oversight and control is essential. So this is from Section H, generative AI. And I think this goes more to sort of like how I would use it, right? They say Gen AI can be used to enhance our journalists' expertise, but not replace it. And they then go on to say journalists are always accountable for the journalism they create. I think when you look at how I created my skill, that's similar to what I've done. I've written my own personal editorial code of practice. I like what they're doing. Obviously I do. I'm a Guardian through and through, but I like the approach they're taking. They're not saying AI bad. They're saying AI useful tool if used correctly, and they've put a very thoughtful document together about how it should be used.
Well, that's great. I'm sure it's a wonderful document, and I'm sure every journalist is kind of diligently reading it every morning, but as they go into work and before they publish anything. But unfortunately, we've already seen real world examples of how publications like The Times, Insider, real world publications have been caught out by taking fake publications from people masquerading as PRs, from masquerading as freelance journalists. And unfortunately, the humans involved in the process weren't able to see that what they were being fed was a load of AI written material, a lot of which was actually using fake sources. There was one particular one where The Times republished an interview with Bill de Blasio, the former mayor of New York City, that was completely made up. It was completely made up. And an AI was being used to deliver it to them. So again, it comes down to, you can write all the policies you want, but if you don't, again, it comes back to, if you don't have competent, diligent humans involved in the process who are able to have that taste and discernment, then it's all going to fall apart.
Amen, bro.
Yeah. Okay. It sounds like we might come up with the same verdict. So go on, Hamish. What do you think? AI is turning the internet, journalism in particular, into a sea of slop.
I don't think it will. I don't think it is. I think that, journalists know the risks. I really do. I know that the editors know the risks of all of this. They've been bitten by what can happen to the internet and the impact that can have on a business model. And I think that what you've quoted a number of examples of where it's gone wrong. We're at the foothills of AI at the moment, right? People will learn, editors will learn, journalists will learn how to change their practices to spot the sort of stuff that you've talked about and to be more rigorous with how they use AI, so that I think we'll start seeing less and less examples of what you're talking about slipping through. And I genuinely believe that it will be used in a way to help the journalists do more of the journalism that you and I so desperately want them to do, both locally, nationally, regionally, and whatever. And I do not believe that journalism, and we are being really clear here that it's news brands, magazines, editorial content, not one-man bands creating shit on blogs and YouTube and Substack, because that could well get into a sleeve stock. We've been clear here that it's editorially curated journalism and content. I don't believe that that's going to end up being full of slop.
Yeah. My verdict is, I think it is partly true. It's already partly true. You're essentially saying that it's going to get better. I don't know that it will. I think you're already seeing, when we talk about video content, we were talking about content delivery of advertising in the previous episode. I think if you look at the editorial side of things, some of it is actually quite cool. I mean, there are some amazing YouTube videos you can see where they've kind of created AI for how London looked in the 1600s, and it's incredibly plausible and really well done. And you're already seeing some wonderful examples of how AI is creating wonderful things you couldn't have done otherwise. But you're also seeing a load of slop, and the key determinant is going to be the consumers, the viewers, the listeners, the readers, whether they are prepared to accept slop en masse. Unfortunately, the early indications aren't good. Where you see social media consumption, and you see that people actually are quite prepared to actually, if it's content like cooking content, recipes, exercise videos, there's a lot of slop going around. But actually, if people are prepared to kind of get some sort of utility from it, and it's just what they expect from internet content, then I think you could actually see slop be viable as a content solution going forward. And it might not be pretty, but it's probably the internet that we're going to have to live with. But I take what you say is true in terms of the professional side of things, and I just hope that, again, it's slightly separate to the AI conversation, but it's really the business model that needs fixing.
Agreed.
Okay.
I enjoyed that.
A lot of disagreement, but we did actually come to some sort of agreement towards the end. So that was episode 4 of Believe It or Not. You can find us on the Media Leader on Thursdays for this limited series, wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks very much, Hamish, again, and thank you out there for listening. See you next time.